read 18 books in February, which is insane for 28 days. I'm gonna share with you my top 5 as well as my stats. To start, I use Storygraph for absolutely everything. I read 18 books this month. My top moods for February were adventurous, emotional, and reflective, which again, I feel like is a description of my personality. I only read 2 nonfiction books this month, which is 11%, and so 89% of the books were fiction. My top genres, which is a little different than it was last time. For February, my top genres are fantasy, which was 9 books, literary, which is 6 books, and LGBTQIA+, which was 5 books. The format I read the books in, most of them were digital, and that was 8 books. I listened to 7 audiobooks, again from Libby, and I read 3 physical print books. This is my favorite thing. It's not tracked in Storygraph, but it's something I like to keep track of, and it is my breakdown of source of where I got my books, because I don't love to just buy books. I really enjoy curating my collection. So I got 13 books from the library, again, through my Libby app. 1 book was Kindle Unlimited. I bought 3 of them, which was from January, but 3 of the books I read were bought. And then one of the books I read was an ARC review, which was through NetGalley. Let's get into the 5-star books of this month. There were 6 of them, but 2 were duology, so I'm gonna combine those together. Only 1 was a audiobook, and that was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. It is a middle grades fantasy book where a young boy is found in a graveyard by the ghosts there and the guardian of the graveyard, and he is raised there. It follows his adventures in the graveyard, meeting people outside of the graveyard, his education from ghosts, and he has to stay in the graveyard because there is a man hunting him down to kill him. So each chapter is like a short story that plays into the overarching story. It's Neil Gaiman, so there's a lot of really interesting questions asked and themes, and it's just a really fun concept. It is narrated by Neil Gaiman. I highly recommend the audiobook specifically because Neil Gaiman does so many fun voices for each character that it felt like almost a whole cast listening to it. The next one is an oldie but a goodie, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This has been on people's 5-star books for a long time, and it's no different for me. I was a little skeptical the first 30%, it was kind of hard to get into. It's still really beautiful. One of my favorite quotes from that book, I became really into quotes this month. It's, "The world feels complete and whole, and I, its child, fit into it seamlessly." What a beautiful statement. It's a really curious book where the main character, Piranesi, he's our narrator, and he's exploring his world, which is not our world, it's a different one. And he's interacting with the world in really unique ways, and the house that he's living in. It's just really beautifully written, and the observations are really intriguing. I think 30% of the way through is when the main conflict and plot is introduced, but you really need that first 25 to 30% to build a foundation for what's to come. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. It feels very dark academia. The writing style and the curiosity of it reminded me so much of C.S. Lewis's Out of the Silent Planet series. So if you liked that, I think you would love this book. Defy the Night and Defend the Dawn is a duology that is a young adult fantasy. There is a romance in there, but it's not a spicy romance. It kept my attention. There's a twist in the beginning of the first one that had my jaw dropping. I just love being surprised in those ways. The characters are so lovable. The tension in the book is power and people and your inner self and the self you present to the world. It's really intriguing. And there's a pandemic happening as part of the plot. I'm always curious to see how authors handle that. It was really fast paced. It kept my attention. 5 stars all around. If you don't like young adult fantasy though, you probably won't like it, but if you do, this is a 5-star rating for it. And that's how I do all of these. My star rating system, I do it according to the genre and how I interacted with it. So The Graveyard Book, I'm not going to treat it like a adult book because it's a middle grades book. That in mind is how I judge it. On a Sunbeam is a graphic novel, so that is one of the physical books I read. I can't imagine reading it not in a physical form. and it was so beautiful. It's one of the first graphic novels I've read, and that medium was surprising, and just the subtlety of the storytelling without words. I didn't really know what to expect, but that was a really pleasant surprise. It is a queer sci-fi romance. It was just so beautiful. I showed it in the book buying wrap-up video of January, so if you want to like see examples, I don't have it with me right now, definitely go look at that. But if you're just looking for like a very like cozy found family vibe, this is definitely the book for you. It was such a nice break from like back-to-back gory fantasy books I was reading. I really just needed like a cozy sci-fi found family book, and the illustrations were just so vivid and the color palette was so intentional. It was just such a creative book. And lastly, A Song for the Wild Bill was on everyone's favorite books for 2022. I initially wanted to buy it, but then I saw how short it was. I was like, oh, I don't want to buy it if it's this short. Like, I don't know if I'll actually like read that much of it. I will be buying it now though, because this book is so beautiful. The story is set in a world where robots have become sentient, and so they leave our world and humans are like, yeah, totally, we shouldn't be using you as slaves. So if you ever want to interact with us, you come back. But until then, we aren't going to be using any machinery. So this human world has evolved into such a way where no machinery is used and there's no like interaction with robots either. It follows the main character, and they have a very successful business as a tea monk. Basically like a counselor that makes cozy tea, like you can just kind of unload. I don't know, I wish that existed. It sounds really nice. They are really unsatisfied with their job, even though they love it and they are good at it and they know they're making a difference. They just feel a little burnt out and unsatisfied. So they decide that they're going to go to the wilderness, go on this kind of like soul-searching journey. And while they're doing that, they meet a robot who's coming to check on humans to see how they're faring. What do they need? It's exploring the questions of what makes us who we are, what is our purpose, why are we here, what is happiness? The observations and the philosophy just hit home for me, truthfully. There were two quotes specifically that I was obsessed with. The robot speaking. They say, because it is enough to exist in the world and marvel at it. You don't need to justify that or earn it. You are allowed to just live. That is all most animals do. And then the second one, Moscap the robot says, do you not find consciousness alone to be the most exhilarating thing? Here we are in this incomprehensibly large universe, on this one tiny moon, around this one incidental planet, and in all the time this entire scenario has existed, every component has been recycled over and over and over again into infinitely incredible configurations, and sometimes those configurations are special enough to be able to see the world around them. You and I, we're just atoms that arrange themselves the right way. And we can understand that about ourselves. Is that not amazing? I think one of the reasons that this book hit home is one of the really big takeaways for van life for me was that you don't have to be doing anything. Like, you can just be, you can just sit outside all day and watch something, and that is enough. I feel like the lessons that I have learned so tangibly were really highlighted in this book, and it was beautiful. That's my February wrap-up. Those were my 5-star reads. Let me know in the comments what you read this month and which ones you loved, if you read any of the ones I mentioned, and I will talk to you soon because I am finishing up the vlog where we moved from Florida to Colorado and all the books I read during it. So that will be finishing up soon. Otherwise, I will see you there. Bye.